Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. I am excited for today's show. Here's why. You heard the program on women on the Fringe just a couple weeks ago when I had those wonderful women on this show. Marie D. Jones and Denise Agnew and Nicole Strickland. Here I'm having a hard time struggling to remember my guests. That's a bad thing. It's old age, folks. I'm telling you, my brain is slowly decaying. We went through a laundry list of amazing women in this field. And we were, between the four of us, bantering about, and it's a shame, why more, and I don't know even why we have to say wonderful women in the field aren't celebrated, and why we even have to... why we have to split this into men and women, but why these wonderful people in the field aren't celebrated more. And as I was reading the book, and I read it very quickly from cover to cover, as it's a wonderful book, one name in particular in one person's writing hit me so hard between the eyes that I said, my God, I need this person on the show. And they didn't get very much space. Don't get me wrong. There wasn't much space here at all. It was Dr. Heather Lynn. And her words were quite amazing. And I want to bring her on the show today to talk a little bit about what it was she said in the book. And I want to talk a little bit about her writings and her podcast, of course, and her work, because what she's put out there into the universe is quite extraordinary. And she's got quite the brilliant mind. Dr. Heather Lynn is an author, historian, and renegade archaeologist on a quest to uncover the truth behind ancient mysteries. She holds numerous degrees and certificates in both history and archaeology and is a member of professional organizations, including the Association of Ancient Historians and the World Archaeological Congress. She left a life in academia to investigate ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, ancient aliens, and the occult. Heather's work exposes our hidden history, challenging the accepted narrative found in mainstream history books. She is also a contributor to History's Ancient Aliens and a frequent guest on podcasts and radio programs like Coast to Coast AM and this one right here. Heather also hosts the Midnight Academy podcast, which I'll encourage you to check out. We'll have a link to it in the description of this program. She features guests on topics ranging from ancient aliens and lost civilizations to esoteric knowledge and unexplained phenomena, bleeding expert analysis with intriguing theories, available on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. Let's bring her in now to the program. Let's welcome in to Darkness Radio, Dr. Heather Lynn. Dr. Lynn, welcome to the program for the very first time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I got to tell you, first of all, it's very rare that, and I tell you, I've been doing this program now for 18 years. And I don't want to say it's very rare that somebody's words hit me so hard that I almost lose my breath. But as I'm reading the book, I go, whoa, 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 time out, time out. It's like I got hit by a fire hose. And I said, you know what? There's so much here that, I could put together a couple of shows based on just this small blurb. So I have to ask you, when Denise comes to you and says, I want you to put together just a blurb. You only have so many words for Women on the Fringe. Is it hard for you to sit down and go, okay, I have to make an introduction. I have to put out a little bit about myself. Is it hard for you to choose what it is you're going to write? Or do you say, I know my mission statement. Here's what I'm going to hit them with. I'm going to put it on the page.
That's a really good question. The first challenge is keeping it at a word count minimum. Mm-hmm. Really long-winded. I could just go on and on, but wrapping my mind around the word count minimum, what I did was basically just thought, well, what's the question? The question is essentially, why did you go into this direction? What got you interested? Very basic question. And I just opened my heart and said the truth. So I didn't really orchestrate it very much. I just told what it was that led me to investigating these sort of fringe theories. And it happened to, I think that because my route getting to this point was so different, maybe that's what led it to be a little more interesting than it maybe promised to be. So I don't know, but I wish I had a grander story than that. It was just me sitting down and thinking, well, why did I get into this? What what started it, and just examining my heart and putting it out there.
Can you tell our listeners what it was that got you into this field and what stirred your interest?
Yeah, well, again, long-winded. So long story short.
No, go ahead. We have time. We got plenty of time.
How much time do you have, right?
Lots of time, yeah.
Well, it was a dark and stormy night. No. So essentially, as far back as I can remember, I liked things that were a little fun and odd, like those shows. Like in my growing up, it was like Unsolved Mysteries and Sightings and In Search of and that sort of thing. So, I always had interest in mythology and in that. So, nothing exciting there. What ended up getting me really into it was that when I was about 15 years old, I ran away from home. When I was 16, I had a car, I had back and forth. I was running away. I started the journey of running away from home. Mm-hmm. So at 16, though, I had a car and I successfully escaped. I say successfully loosely because if you are a high school dropout and a teenage runaway, there's no success there. No. It is not a good thing. So, but I hit the road, and the reason I did so is I had very troubled childhood. It was me and a single mother, and she was bipolar and not taking medication, and instead she was an alcoholic, and it was just all the things you could imagine. Very hard, very difficult. So the problem was I was very quiet and studious, and I got very good grades. I was interested in music. I had music scholarships and this sort of thing. And so it never occurred to me to rebel. I was just do as you're told, whatever. I think the one thing that was the catalyst for me leaving was that I did get a scholarship to leave, to go out of state to study at Interlochen Academy, which is a very good school that kind of primes you for Juilliard. Well, my mother's like, no, you're not going. And so she was, mentally ill. So the school called a conference, and they were like, maybe if we talk to the parents, she'll understand why this is a great opportunity. So had a little conference, and at the conference, she came in drunk and belligerent, and she punched the school counselor, and it's the whole thing. What? It was as like, Jerry Springer as it gets. And so, at that time, they just kind of looked at me like, we are so sorry, we tried. And it was the first time that I really just I couldn't make excuses. Plus, I was getting to be a teenager. Yeah. So I was in that time where you start to think, wait a minute, this isn't right. But that was the moment that I realized that my mother didn't really have my best at heart. Yeah. And so that fundamentally changed my outlook on the whole situation. So as soon as I could, I started leaving and, being one of these like runaway troubled youths. And at 16, I left. What I did maybe wasn't quite that common either. So I had grown up in a Catholic household and a Catholic school. And so spirituality and religion and that sort of thing was fascinating to me, especially because I loved myths so much. Yeah. And I started realizing the intersection of mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and of course, Catholicism. And it fascinated me. But I was deeply spiritual. And so even though I ran away, what I did was I was looking for a spiritual answer to everything. Mm-hmm. So I go to churches and synagogues and temples, and I went into Buddhism. I just traveled all around the country looking for answers, having all kinds of experiences, good and bad. And then because, being a musician and being a teenager, I thought, I'll go to Los Angeles. That's right. Music, where all the people go. So, I just basically was transient and kind of bohemian, and I was living van life without a van before van life was a thing. And I found myself, though, it's not very glamorous or romantic. I mean, you have to eat, you have to live, you have to dodge danger, especially as a female, like 16, 17 years old. Thankfully, I had a car because that gave me an element of shelter and protection, so I wasn't literally on streets. But in terms of eating, that was rare. So I really was in a bad shape. So I spent some time at like Waffle Houses and truck stops, because truck stops had showers.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I met people, overnight truckers. And when I tell this story, sometimes people think, oh my gosh, how did you survive? And for fear of the dangers that I would encounter. And if I had a daughter, I would say, do not do what I did. However, surprisingly, most people that I encountered were very nice people. I met so many nice people there. It made me feel that, all faith in humanity wasn't lost. Mostly I encountered great people, varied backgrounds, but very good people.
Yeah.
So I did find myself, though, at one point, in just driving around the desert. I had a funny Area 51 story that came out of that.
Really?
And this I didn't include this in the book because there's only so much space. But funny enough, I ended up going to Area 51.
Okay.
Or so I was hoping. So I go and I park. I had a Pontiac Sunbird at the time. And there were cell phones, but I did not have, they were not smartphones. And this phone was useless. So it was like, not a safe and good idea. So I parked the car on the side of the road in the desert and I just start walking, right? Like, oh, what am I going to find? I'm just going to explore. I really don't know what I was thinking. I was essentially a lost child. And I just thought this was fun. I knew the lore of Area 51. But I didn't really take it seriously. I just was funning around.
Yeah.
And I keep going and I keep walking. And I come across one of those signs. Now, everybody probably knows those signs if they're interested in the area that says basically like, if you go any further, we reserve the right to shoot and kill you.
Yeah.
And I stopped for a minute and thought, wait a minute. And it got serious because it had never occurred to me. Again, I'm a kid. Mm-hmm. So and I was a kid that followed the rules and I respected authority and all of this, except my mother. So, I looked at that sign and I thought, oh, like my government could just kill me and I'm a runaway. So like if they killed me and I'm in the desert, no one would know. I'm just here. Mm-hmm. So I kind of get panicky. And of course, if anyone knows the area, I was nowhere close to Area 51. I mean, they put those signs so far out. There was just nothing. But I didn't know. And I just see that sign. And it was like faith in authority crashed down even more. And something became real. And I didn't have time to think about what that real was, whether or not it was aliens or if it was just, research or what it was. I just didn't know. But I turned around to walk back. But then I realized I had gotten so far from the car that it was, very difficult to find my way back because in the desert, everything looks alike. I didn't know. I didn't realize. And so I'm walking back and I thought every step, am I going in the right direction? Am I getting deeper into danger or am I getting back to my car? Well, I hadn't ventured that far. So thankfully I did get back to my car safely. But I get in the car and I start to drive and I notice over a ridge, the classic black SUVs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is real. And I was scared. And so to their credit, they didn't really do anything other than I was followed for a good, maybe, I don't know, like maybe mile or something. I reached an intersection, I don't even know how far it was, but I was white knuckling it. I was shaking. I was so scared. And so I got up to the intersection and I just sensed that they wanted me not to be there, obviously.
Yeah.
So I just kept going and they made like a left and then just like went away. And now I thought, oh my gosh, I escaped. I just felt like I had been given a second chance at life. And I didn't realize, of course, anyone who knows anything at this point knows that that's just what they do. I was so far away from it. It's not that big a deal. I didn't know that, though, at the time. That to me was proof that something was being hidden. And I was really afraid. So I go back into town and I start talking to people about my experience. And of course, I hear all kinds of crazy stories. So that just changed my mindset. It changed my relationship with authority. It changed my relationship with these stories. And it started getting me thinking that there's something to it. There has to be something. What that something is, I don't know, but it just piqued my interest even more. So I'm spending more time in this area and driving around the Mojave Desert eventually. which is beautiful,
Yes.
but still don't recommend it. If you're a teenager and you're listening, do not go into a car and drive around aimlessly in the desert. Not a good idea. But it is a very lonely thing when you are running away and living like this, like a vagabond. So in those days, there weren't the podcasts, there weren't, things that you could just listen to on demand, but there was overnight talk radio.
Yes.
And you can only listen to so much music. As much as I love music, I really wanted that companionship, somebody to talk to. And so I listened to a lot of talk radio, in particular, of course, Coast to Coast AM.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, art was, there would be like Somewhere in Time, Dreamland, and then George was pretty much doing it all. But I would listen to these shows. I had never heard of anything like this. And I would listen to these broadcasts and they'd be just bonkers. You would hear from one time, you could hear somebody who was, highly credentialed and talking about amazing things that were scientific, say like Michio Kaku or somebody like that. And then on another episode, you're going to hear somebody claiming that there's a ghost right beside them and, they're talking to them now. And then the callers would have all kinds of strange stories. And that oscillation between subject matter was entertaining and most of all distracting. Mm-hmm. And in my situation at the time, I really needed that distraction in such a way that, I needed a distraction for my mind that was not just music or story, but something that I could sink my teeth into a little bit, and that would give me a bit of escapism. So I fell in love with that medium right then and there, and it stuck with me. But I had a lot more traveling experiences and growing to do before I could even think about entering that arena. But I did used to think, wow, this is so cool. I know nobody like this. All of my friends are just dumb kids and, whoever else, and all the adults in my life were just a wreck. And I used to think, if only I knew interesting people, because I love to talk. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, how cool would it be just to get together with interesting people and just talk, have late night conversations and hear what they have to say. And, I was getting a little bit of that when I was talking to people on, whether it be bus routes eventually or, at the truck stops and this sort of thing. So I was getting to know individuals. And so I just love story. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool one day just to have people like that to talk to? And then over time, I went through a whole lot more, as you could imagine. It takes a lot to climb out of that situation.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I, in my early 20s, ended up moving back to Ohio, where I was originally from. And I thought maybe I'm going to try to reconcile with my mother. But then I find out she had died of cancer.
Oh, no.
And so so that didn't go. And I had a lot of other challenges, as you could imagine. It was really rough. It was really rough. Mm-hmm. And so even if you're in your early 20s, if you're a high school dropout, if you really can't do much for yourself. So I'm working in fast food and just trying to get by. Once my mother passed, though, as sad as this sounds, it was a little bit freeing to me.
Yeah.
Because I no longer had that voice saying, oh, you can't do this. You'll never do this. And so it's unfortunate, but that was gone. Mm-hmm. And as much as we like to try to internalize those voices, unfortunately, that is something that happens. I kind of had the wherewithal at the time to put that on her and say, no, that was her. She thought I couldn't do it, but I think I can do it. So I went back to school. I went to community college, and it was really scary for me because I had never been into a college, and people, in my family, it was sort of like, it's not what we do. That's not for us. My mother actually told me, you should go to secretary school. I'm like, is that even a thing? I don't even know. She was really old fashioned that way. I'm like, I'm not going to secretary school. I mean, if I'm going to do anything, I'll have a secretary. Like, I was more ambitious than that.
Right.
So it was, I go into this little community college, and it might as well have been Oxford. I was shaking. I was scared. I go up to the registration and they're like, can I help you? And I said, how do I go here? And the woman is just like, take this paper, fill it out, done. So I fill out the paper, I'm doing what I can. And, it was not easy because unfortunately during that time too, and I didn't include this in the book as well, but I'll tell it to you. Sure. I actually don't know if I've told anybody this on air. Okay. I tell people all all my business, but I don't know how much of it I've said on air until now. But in that time, I'm working in a fast food restaurant, trying to go to community college, and I didn't have a car anymore, and I was taking a bus back and forth, and so I did a lot of walking, and I was highly visible, and I apparently had somebody stalking me.
Oh no.
Yes, and so at one point I was kidnapped at gunpoint and taken to a location and assaulted.
Oh.
Well, the trauma from that, and I do, we say trauma a lot in society, kind of throw it around and whatever, but I mean that quite literally. The trauma from that made it much more difficult for me to pursue school.
Well, yeah.
So I struggled. So I go back and we're trying to, read A Brave New World from Huxley, one of my favorite books, but I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. And it just wasn't still time for me. Yeah. So after even more healing and even more, struggling, and remember through all this time, I'm still listening to Coast to Coast. I'm still reading these stories. I'm still interested in this as sort of a fun escape from the everyday. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of got me through, especially at night when I had trouble sleeping. Yeah. I really had trouble sleeping because of PTSD from that event. Right. And I would put on Coast and, listen. It would get my mind away from the thinking of all the bad things. And I could focus it on whatever it was they were talking about that evening. And then I would be able to go to sleep. And so it was great. And but I did end up going back to school. I tried again. I went to a different community college. And I just, I ended up going for business because I thought, well, that's what you're supposed to do. I'm just going to take something general and whatever. But along the way, I had an art history professor, and she was amazing. And she gave us a first writing assignment. And my writing assignment, I took it very seriously. So I did a paper on the meaning and reason for cave art in Lascaux. And I put it together, and I didn't think anything of it. I'm just doing my work. Mm-hmm. But she contacted me afterward and asked if we could talk about the paper. And I'm thinking, oh, God. I was already insecure, like I had imposter syndrome, because, again, I had a 9th grade education at best at that point. So I'm like, oh, here I go. And so I'm trying. But instead, she tells me that I really had some unique ideas in this paper, and that she was interested in talking to me more about these ideas, and that she thinks I should pursue the research. And she thought it was one of the best papers she'd seen. And this woman had an Ivy League education. She was really wrapped up in the community. And for her to say that to me just blew my mind. It erased all of the negativity I had from the past, because those people had no credibility for me anyway. But then here's this person that did have credibility, that I did respect, and she tells me this. Yeah. At that point, I thought, oh, screw accounting. I'm done with this. I'm going full on. Yeah. And I started asking the counselor there, what classes should I take? What do I do? I don't even know what some of these subjects are. I didn't even know what anthropology was as a discipline. Mm-hmm. So I just worked my way through it, and thanks to some great professors and, the help of people at that community college level, I was able to get very involved and join the archaeology program. And after that, then pursue higher education, and then higher until I got a master's in history and, a doctorate, and then went back to the community college, the same one that I initially left, and became a professor. And so, and to probably make it even cooler, because, professor's fun, and it's good. It's cool, right? It can be kind of fun.
It's more than cool.
But the coolest thing ever was that along the line of that education, it is not an easy thing to stick with it through life's challenges. Maybe when you're a kid and your parents are paying for it and it's a big party, but when you're a working adult and you're trying to go and do this, it's not easy. No. So I had my ups and downs, and especially working in the field and getting involved in some of the research and finding that it's not really like unicorns and roses. It's there's a lot of corruption and some different things. And so it was a journey. And at one point I got a little frustrated, and I thought, well, I'm going to email Michael Cremo, author of Forbidden Archaeology. Yeah. I don't know why, but I just thought, well, there's an email here. I'm going to email him, my favorite author in that subject matter. And so I emailed him, And I asked him, I said, should I stick with this or should I just start writing other things? Should I be an independent researcher? And to his credit, he gave me really good advice. First of all, the fact that he emailed me back, that was another bit of nitrous. Like, it was like, okay, so I had a professor believe in me. And now this author who I'd only heard on Coast to Coast, and I had this book, they even responded to me, not only responded, but just gave me genuinely good advice.
Yeah.
And that advice was authentic. It was, you know, here are the two paths. You know, if you take it this way, this is what's going to happen. If you go this way, this is what's going to happen. So you can stay in and push the envelope, but you can just only do it ever so slightly. But if you stay in, you do get the education, and it's important to still go a traditional path. But what you do with it after, you know, you can push the envelope even further. And I thought, you know, that made sense. It was pretty rational.
Right.
And that was what I needed at that time, where I was feeling a little irrational, prone to running off and just being impulsive at that age. So that led me to think, well, I'm going to go through this whole process, but almost like a double agent. I'm going to learn what I can from this, and then always apply these methods and this sort of source analysis and way of thinking onto these alternative ideas. Give them the treatment that I think they deserve and that I would like to, you know, give them, using the tools of the literal trade. So I kept that in my hat. And in the end, I was able to do that. I started writing and doing all the things that I wanted to do that way. And, you know, synchronicity, I guess. I end up finding myself on Coast to Coast as a guest. And, you know, that's a cool thing. But it was extra cool for me because nobody knew, but I knew that at 20 years, maybe, well, 10, I don't know, a little decade at least.
Yeah.
Previously, I was a homeless teenage runaway listening to that show thinking, if only I could talk to interesting people. And then, wow, wait a second. I'm on this show. Am I an interesting person? What's happened? It was really wild, but very blessed.
I know.
So that's one of the reasons I got into it. And it's just cool, isn't it?
It is cool. I know.
Supernatural. Come on.
I know exactly how you feel. I worked there for 6 years, 7 years on Coast. And I remember everything from listening to it in the days of art to board hopping it at different stations to starting this show and going, wouldn't it be cool to even just lead into it on a radio station, to eventually sitting right across from Ian Punnett.
Oh, wow.
And you know, I mean, and watching him do the show and surreal. And you know, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, Dr. Lynn. I'm right there with you.
It's amazing when those things kind of line up and you have that level of closure. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't gone to Los Angeles since I had left it, you know, a teenage runaway. Mm-hmm. The last time I remember being in LA, it was around 9/11. I left right after 9/11. So I spent 9/11 in Los Angeles. And during that time, it was getting really rough for me. And I had a lot of time where I was really needing to eat. Yeah, I literally, you know, as sad as this sounds, I resorted to eating out of the trash, you know, behind grocery stores that would throw things away. You know, I knew some people, we would get together and look for those things. And so at some point I'm literally eating out of the trash in Los Angeles, and then I leave and then I don't go back, but I end up going back. The next time I go back to Los Angeles, it was for shooting an episode of Ancient Aliens.
Wow.
And I had a car take me, you know, to and from. And in that moment, too, I'm sitting in that car in the back of the you know, the car, and I'm looking and I'm watching and thinking, I didn't think I'd ever really come back here, let alone in this condition. So I've had a lot of these like full circle moments that remind me every day that I'm very thankful for everything. And I'm not just saying, hey, you know, I'm thankful that I have a book or that I get to talk to cool people, but I'm thankful when there's a nice warm shower still. It doesn't matter how long ago you faced these things. You still get thankful for that, or at least you should. Yes. I really think you should. Yeah. I think you should never give that up and let lifestyle creep happen, because gratitude is everything. It really does make the difference. So practice gratitude. But Yeah, I
Right.
couldn't be more grateful for everything and listeners and readers and people like yourself who still allow me the opportunity to come on and talk. But yeah, so that's my story essentially.
That's
I mean, that's the story, the biographical story of, how it is that I came into this stuff. Of course, I'm still asked, well, why are you still in it? Shouldn't you know better? Like, especially from colleagues and people like that, as they just don't understand. But it's like, no, you don't understand. This is these ideas. They're like the birthplace of hypotheses. You
yeah.
can't. You have to be creative. And someone has to go in there and look around, right? Why not
Right,
me?
right. Well, before we go to break, let's talk about that for a brief moment because it does seem ideas that get fleshed out on television, stuff like Ancient Aliens, to the majority of your field, I believe they say, well, come on, aliens helping to build pyramids. Come on, we believe that there are other more logical systems that can explain how the pyramids were built. You really believe an alien came down and helped the Egyptians build pyramids? When we believe there's fulcrums or other things that could have done it. When you come across things like that, does it feel defeatist to stare at a colleague and go, "No, wait a minute," and assemble your evidence and say, "Well, here's why." Or do you rise to the challenge, much like you have your entire life, and go, "Aha! But buckle in, buddy. Here we go."
I kind of do the buckle in, but much to their chagrin, probably. I do kind of say, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride here because it is very reductionist to make those claims. And that's what a lot of people do. So a lot of people will just say, oh, you mean that you think that, aliens built the pyramid. So for instance, when I have to tell like a department chair, hey, I have to, take a week off or something because I'm doing an episode of Ancient Aliens, immediately the issue is, so you're saying the aliens built the pyramids? And it used to be looked at as, you just kind of are ignorant or, fantastic. But now it's starting to be, oh, what does that mean? Do you have nefarious reasons for thinking that the aliens built the pyramids? And so it's getting a little touchier even still. But the thing is, it's a great opportunity to educate people and say, that's a reductionist viewpoint of a mischaracterization of the viewpoint of so many people that are not claiming that aliens literally built pyramids. There's so much more to it. Don't you want to know how people arrive at what they think? And maybe there's something to it. And so it's a conversation starter. And I've found surprisingly, people are more than willing to have those conversations. There's very few that are so hyper vigilant that they will not even entertain hearing you out. And those people just aren't going to listen anyway, and they're not worth talking to in that way. So because they make it known right away that, hey, this is my ideology. You're not breaking through. Case closed, over. I'm not hearing it. And so you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And some people you just have to fold them.
That's true. There's an idea out there that is gaining some steam. At least it has been over the last couple of years. And that is that I had Timothy Hogan on the program at the beginning of the year. And that is that the arc, or the different arcs that are out there, a series of arcs, maybe 10 to 12 that are still out there, are power sources for stargates inside the pyramids. And that Timothy Hogan has had access to some of these pyramids that most archaeologists don't have access to. And that he's actually seen, when he was on the show, he's seen the hieroglyph that says Stargate inside one of the tombs of the dead. And that it's just a matter of getting a hold of these arcs, putting it in place, and if you can get it to power up the Stargate, you never know what would happen.
Wow.
I'm wondering.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when I throw that at you, what your first thought is.
My first thought is, wow, that's fascinating. I want to hear more. And also, I need to hear more before I would accept it. I need to hear exactly how he came to this conclusion. I'd like to see which hieroglyph he's speaking about. I'd like to understand some of the axioms of his belief. Like, for instance, where is it specifically stated that there are these 12 arcs in existence, and they all contain this level of power, et cetera. I'd also be interested in unpacking the idea of the translation of Stargate from an Egyptian source to an English source. How is it that, because in language, there's not direct translations often. It's, loosely translated. Anybody who speaks two different languages understands that. There's certain words and ideas that, conceptually are not represented the same in the language. And so there's a question of translation and interpretation. So I would be interested in learning, exactly what that translation is. And not in such a way that I'm challenging, like, all right, prove it. But at that level, yeah, I want to know. And I come at it not in this like skeptical way that's, can't wait to debunk this, but in a way that is critical because I want to know and I want to find out more, because if it is true, can you imagine what that means? So stranger things have happened. So I'm definitely open to all these ideas. It's just the first thing I would do is approach it in such a way that I would look for, show me how you arrived at this. Show me the sources. Let's have a discussion about it. And that could be done by a conversation or reading a book or just going to those sources and investigating for yourself. And that's the whole doing your own research that, everybody says, and it's kind of like overplayed and, but it's true. You do have to do your own research, and it's important to understand how to go about doing that and vetting sources and verifying sources and understanding it that way. So, but I would look at it as a great project to dig into. No pun intended.
Yeah. God, I would love to get you and him together and get you actually on. He runs these tours of these different pyramids too. And
that'd be cool. I'd love to talk to him. Yeah.
Yeah. And get the two of you together and get you on his tours and get you into some of these pyramids so you could see it for yourself.
Oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to see. Because we don't know. There's so much that gets hidden. Lies by omission too. Yeah. It's not always a lie. It's often things are just not shown to the public.
That's right.
Lie by omission.
And that's one of that's kind of one of his specialties, is getting into these places that other people don't get into.
Well, hook us up. Make it happen.
I've got to. I've got to get the two of you together, because it's, again, one brilliant mind and another getting together is just an amazing thing. At least for me, it is. I tell you what, let's take our break right here. When we come back, I want to talk about evil. Well, let's get into the subject of evil, because you've I think, I don't want to say, I don't want to paint you the wrong way here, Dr. Lynn, but you've let's just say, specialized in getting into the subject of evil, or getting into different areas of evil, and studied it and pulled out different nuggets from these different civilizations and studying it. And it fascinates me. It doesn't fascinate me the actual behavior of evil. It fascinates me the psychology of evil, and what's behind it. And I think it does you too. Not necessarily the makeup of it or the behaving badly. I think it's the psychology of it and understanding it. And I think we're both on the same wavelength here, and without me burying myself too much here before the break. When we come back, we'll talk more with Dr. Heather Lynn. She's got some fascinating books out there, folks. We have a link in the description of this program to her website so you can learn more about her. And Dr. Lynn, before we get to the break, you're teaching a course. Is this right? Tell me a little bit about it before we go to break.
This is right. I'll announce it here. I haven't announced it fully, but I have retired from my day job of teaching. I have given up my professorship, and I am now teaching classes on these fringe subjects on my website. And the first class that I'm offering is this fall, and that is a college level course on the Anunnaki.
Nice. So, yeah, I saw that on the website, and I thought a college course on the Anunnaki. That intriguing. And folks, I encourage you to go to the website and find out more about that, because you will actually learn a language in this course, which is amazing. That's amazing. So find out more by going to the link is in the description of the program. When we come back, we'll learn more about evil with Dr. Heather Lynn coming up next on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. With us is Dr. Heather Lynn, and we are talking about kind of a smattering. We're doing a little jammy jam here today about different topics, and we'll talk in the second segment about the makings of evil. And I want to start first, Dr. Lynn, about a thing you had on your blog, an article you had on your blog. I know what a thing is, a blog, an article, those things you post on a blog. You know what I'm talking about.
Blog post.
English hard, bad for Tim. It's just one of those days. You were talking about the Nazi Witch Project, and I want to talk a little bit about the fascination of evil, the fascination of how, humans supposedly have a duality to them, good and evil. There's the yin and yang, there's the balance supposedly within us, but sometimes that balance gets out of whack. One side rules another. And there is nothing, I think, more evil on this earth than the Nazi regime. I don't think we've seen an evil like it on this earth. We built up to it, I think, to the Nazi regime. We saw different regimes on earth. Some people may, argue Attila the Hun. Some people could argue different dictators throughout the earth, but I think none did it like Adolf Hitler. You could argue that in the Nazi regime to that effect. You wrote a very interesting blog on the Nazi Witch Project, and I'm wondering if you could just summarize it. I'd like people to go to the website and read the blog for itself, but summarize what exactly it was that, and we all are familiar with the fact that the Nazi regime believed in the occult, and they believed that they could acquire more power by reaching out and getting the powers of the occult and use it as a weapon in the war and get an edge over the Allied powers. But what was it in particular that the Nazis believed they could do with this project?
Well, this project is a little strange, as most of them were, but this one I think stood out to me because of the implications of witchcraft, in the sense that we sort of think we know it Hollywood style or Halloween style even. This notion when you say witch of, someone burning, Salem witch trials, all of that cultural baggage, that played into the viewpoint of Heinrich Himmler. He was very well aware of the witch trials. And in addition to all of the different occult fascinations and explorations that he did, it really stood out to him, this notion of witches being burned. And for whatever reason, we cannot explain evil like this, but one thing led to another, and he got it in his mind that these witches that had been burned at the stake must have been burned because they held the secret Aryan wisdom, that they were pagan, Germanic oriented, Aryan, all of that stuff that he believed in. He felt that they had been attacked by a Judeo-Christian worldview. And so Christian, sources or, burn the witches, this sort of thing. And so for him, now, see, I want to make it clear too, it wasn't just the Jewish religion that the Nazis opposed. They also opposed Christianity. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's hard to sometimes wrap your mind around that because of even neo-Nazis sometimes are, Christian nationalists and this sort of thing. And it gets all mixed up in a hodgepodge of, ideology. But essentially at that time, no religion was welcome except this made-up religion of German paganism that, while it did exist to some extent in the past, the records of it were highly fragmented. And that was very troubling to the people in power in Germany who wanted to build this ethos and this history for themselves that claimed that they were, in fact, superior. And it was based in this paganism. So in that worldview, there's no place for anything like a Christianity, let alone Judaism or any other faith. And so they looked at the Christian church as an enemy against the Nazi ideology and blamed them for the burning of these witches who, in their view, just had to have been these pagan Aryans who had secrets in their magical spells and rites. So the question then became, well, what were those magical spells and rites? And if we get those, then maybe what we'll do is figure out, of course, how to have more power. And they felt entitled to that because, again, they believe these Salem witches, they believe that these witches were actually practicing this long lost Germanic, pagan, Aryan practice. So they felt that they were the inheritors of this practice. And so they felt entitled to go get it. So what they did is, along with other excursions with their organization of cultural heritage, they went out and they looked for not only the things we may be familiar with media and culture, things like the Spear of Destiny or, the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail, but they were also looking for evidence of witches and trying to figure out just the spells and incantations and practices of these witches. So, and this was a pet project of Himmler specifically.
And I think, again, you and I were talking before the show, it wasn't that the Nazis were looking for these objects of power because they were fascinated by them. They looked for them as weapons. They looked for them because they wanted that edge in the war. But second, they looked for them because they wanted to crush the world. They wanted to crush whatever was in their way that they opposed. And I think, as we were discussing before the show, people of this modern day seem to want to mold what was evil into I'm looking for the right words here, Dr. Lynn. They want to mold it into a convenient story for their liking. Yeah, caricature. Thank you. They want to mold it into a convenient caricature for their liking, for the modern day. So the Nazis of World War II, they were evil, but they were evil like Darth Vader evil. We want to make it into a likable villain. They weren't a likable villain. This was evil incarnate. And I think people are so busy wanting to live their life and being absorbed in everyday life that we're repeating the mistakes right now. We're repeating it, and we're letting evil back in in the worst way. People think it's okay to, it's just okay to let Nazism slip back into our society. It just isn't.
No, we were talking a little bit beforehand about history repeating itself.
Yeah.
And something I like to point out is that, history doesn't repeat itself, but instead it rhymes. That's what makes it so dangerous. If it repeated itself, we would feel much safer, right? We would know, hey, I recognize those Nazis. I don't like that. I oppose that. And then you feel really good and empowered and safe. But the thing is, you generally don't see these things come back the same way. That's what makes them so nefarious, is they look different. It rhymes. So you aren't prepared for the slipping, the creep, that comes in and takes over. And then before you know it, it's like, wait a minute, this looks familiar. This looks like it could be Nazism after all. And it slips in right under your nose because you think that you're looking for one thing, and really it was right here the whole time. Kind of like how when you're a kid, they tell you, watch out for stranger danger. And in your mind, you see like a stranger looking shifty in a trench coat, maybe has a dog and a white van and candy. But statistically speaking, the ones you have to be most fearful of are the family members, the strange uncles, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's not always what it appears. It's the same way with Satanists, people throw that around too. And in my research into things that are evil, and of course that leads into things like Satanism, I have found that is the same thing again. When you think of a cultist or a Satanist, it's easy to get an image, like a caricature of the teenage rebel wearing the clothes from Hot Topic and black dyed hair, and they're listening to heavy metal. And it's like, yeah, they're a Satanist. Generally, they're the sweetest, nicest people, and they're not. They just have an interest in expressing themselves in different ways. And it's been my firsthand experience, both in research and personal interactions with actual practicing Satanists. They're the least like that you can imagine. So you may know Satanists and not realize it. I think the best representation of that I've ever seen personally is from the movie Rosemary's Baby. Mm-hmm. If anyone remembers that film, the big spoiler alert, the neighbors and the people, the old people in that film, they were Satanists, but they looked like these unassuming, old, quirky, educated, New York elites in this penthouse, and they were just kind of old and well-meaning, and they were the real Satanists. And so the danger through making characters like that in your mind is that, you focus on that and you miss the evil that's right in front of you.
Yes, most definitely. And I guess just to add to this before we switch topics is that my grandfather fought Nazis in World War II, and Nazis weren't good Christians. It should be the first thing that you should realize. Nazis aren't good Christians. Good Nazis are not good Christians. The two do not mix. The ideals are not the same. So if you want to think that, you're definitely wrong. The two do not mix. The ideals don't mix. So don't fool yourself on that one. And I want to commend you for writing the article. Again, I want you folks to go to Dr. Lynn's blog and read the Nazi Witch Project to see what exactly it is we're talking about, because Dr. Lynn so eloquently puts it out there that, again, I'll just restate it. The Nazis didn't care for not just the Jewish religion, but the Christian religion or any religion other than pagans. And it was a specific pagan. You had to be an Aryan to be a pagan. So,
and that was of their own kind of makeup. That wasn't even a version of paganism that, we have people now who practice these sorts of pagan belief systems and this sort of thing. And it wasn't even that. It's something that was being made up as it went. They were going along, making it up as they went along, and that, so it didn't even exist. That, and it was informed a lot by strange ideas at the time regarding areas of theosophy, Aryanism, in the sense that it was a root race, and people. It's a whole unpacked thing that came out of the second occult revival in the 1800s that came out of people channeling information, and some of those people are snake oil salesmen and whatnot, and so the whole thing is really made up. And so, when you say paganism, there are people who try to practice that now. Mm-hmm. It isn't even that. It's not anything other than what the Nazis were making up as they went and trying to find and cherry pick evidence to support.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. You have a book out there, Evil Archaeology, that I want to jump into a couple of the topics in this book, because it's absolutely fascinating. And there's a couple of things I want to get to in this book that stand out to me. When we think evil, we think demons. I mean, that's one of the things obviously we think of. You bring up a topic in this book that hits me right between the eyes. And I want to start on the good part of it first. You bring up the topic of, was Jesus an exorcist? Yep. That question, when it hits me, I go, oh, huh? Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah.
I mean, when I read the Bible, we mind you, some people argue, okay, the Bible is books put together by multiple authors, multiple men. It can be cast out as Jesus is made to be a Messiah. Jesus is meant, put on a pedestal, this, that, and the other. But when you cast it in that light, oh my God, yeah. Oh, okay, I can see that. Yeah. What was he really the first exorcist? Explain what you mean by that. But expound on it.
Well, so the first exorcist, we'll say that he was the first that we maybe have the name of, that we'd be familiar with. And it is challenging to people's preconceived ideas, particularly if they're a Christian, that Jesus would have such a role very explicitly. I mean, you could imagine, well, he'd be able to, right? But does it actually say he did that? And the answer is yes, it did say he did that. So exorcism as a practice goes back to the Sumerian record. And that's something that, I do write about in the book, that even the typical Hollywood depiction of an exorcism that we may think of, the classic priest going and praying over an individual who's possessed and saying, demon, I demand to know your name, and that sort of thing. That rite comes from the Sumerian rite directly. The idea of the importance of learning the name of the demon was there, all of the practices. And so this idea of an exorcism as a rite that's done by a priest and a healer, and those two things were not mutually exclusive. They were one and the same. So the priest was the healer as well. And so he was, a physician spiritually and physically, because these things came with a set of physical symptoms. So if you look at it from the, say, Mesopotamian or Sumerian perspective, you see that what they were doing was a type of proto-medicine. Okay. So you would learn that, okay, say the next door neighbor's son is having a fever, feeling nauseous, had a set of symptoms. And they would call the priest, who was also the healer, and the priest would come and they would say, okay, what are the symptoms? And the reason they need to know the symptoms would be because that tells them what the demon may be that's inhabiting that body. So when they go through these different rituals and try different methods to heal the individual, and something doesn't work, but then maybe they do respond to something like a bitter herb or a potion, that's another clue. Oh, it could be this demon then, because we know this demon likes beer, or this demon does not like beer. Mm-hmm. We gave the patient, or the victim, we gave them a drink of beer and they threw up immediately. That means we're ruling out all these other demons that are known to like beer. So what you see here in this process, which could have been a multi-day process for sure, was early attempts to diagnose based on symptoms and understanding it that way. So when the priest has to learn the name of the demon, that is very important, because when you have the name of the demon, then you know what it is that's needed to cure the individual or exorcise the demon. So it'd be like if we were referring to cancer as a demon, and the name of this demon was cancer. And when we understand that it's cancer, we know the different treatment options that are available. And so that was sort of how they looked at it. So moving on, that was the worldview at the time, and that was thousands of years even before Jesus. And so that was a long time. And so in this ancient world concept, the idea that you lived with any sort of demon was not unheard of. It was a way of life. It was, of course, there's demons, and an understanding of that. So just the fact that you would have Jesus in a world where they accepted the possibility of somebody being possessed by demons is interesting and sometimes not considered. But in the Bible itself, it's in Mark, it does talk about an account of Jesus coming across an individual who is exhibiting the signs of possession. And this is where we get the phrase, it's in popular culture, where Jesus asks the individual, of course, the name. He needs to know if Jesus is the healer. So it's easy to accept Jesus as a healer, right? But there's no distinction between healer and exorcist in those days. So for him to ask the name of the demon, he's looking for a diagnosis. He's looking to understand how he can heal this individual. And that's where we get the phrase, I am legion, because there are many. Mm-hmm. So then Jesus is alerted to the fact this is not one demon. This man is possessed by many demons, which, he goes about then exorcising successfully. And in that story, that's the story of him exorcising the demons and placing their spirits into the bodies of the pigs, the swine. Mm-hmm. And the swine get possessed by these demons. So they act as a scapegoat, essentially. And they get wacky and they run off the side of a hill and die in saving the man. And so that was, one of his first acts of healing, and it happens to be in the form of an exorcism.
With that, there could be some someone being a smartass out there who says, okay, well, if we pray to Jesus or we cast out demons in Jesus's name, who does Jesus pray to, or who does Jesus try to cast out demons in, and what name? There are marks in the Bible that say that Jesus actually called upon Solomon at one time, didn't he? Or didn't he look to Solomon in times of strength, or doesn't he look to Solomon at times?
I think as a reference point, understanding that Solomon was able to conjure the demons and enslave them to do his bidding, which, for good or bad. I mean, later you find in the grimoires that Solomon didn't have a good ending in that case. So there's a lot there. But I think just in a practical sense, if someone were to ask, well, if Jesus is doing this, then whose name is it in, right? What would be in his name? If you subscribe to the idea that Jesus is like a son of God, and also like in a Trinitarian viewpoint that he is also God, then it would just be in his Father's name, which would also be him. It would be moot to separate that. Again, this is coming from a perspective of a religious, believer in that way. And not all, even Christians, have a Trinitarian view of that. So the answer would be different than for whomever, you're going to ask. Like it's, I'm hesitant to say, well, it would be, of course, his dad, because some people don't even believe that he is, he existed, for one thing. I mean, we could look at it from that perspective. But in that worldview, you could say he would be doing it in his own name. And in that name, it would be the name of his father. And you can see examples of that in the Bible anyway, where he refers to his father's house. He refers to his father, implying that it's God the Father and he is God the Son.
Interesting indeed. And to me, you can see where lineage is passed down, where he would be the first exorcist, where it would be that. But and to be a healer, I get that there's not a jump, or much of a jump, from healer to exorcist to banishing. You banish a disease, you banish a demon. There's one is related to the other. But to me,
you could take a very materialist approach to that question as well, because you could say, well, then how did Jesus do this? You could say, well, if Jesus wasn't the Son of God, if Jesus isn't some sort of, supernatural, person, if Jesus was just a human individual, then you could look at it from the materialist perspective of what it was the tradition had been, which was an early diagnostic tool. And you could say, well, in his healing, it doesn't explicitly say how he healed. It doesn't say he lifted his hands and said, heal, and that was all there was to it. He could have invoked other types of methods to heal. And that's not to be an apologist. It's just saying that could be approached in a lot of different ways, given the understanding of exorcisms and exorcisms as being something healing, and the disease component of that being intertwined. Even in, there's a couple different Muslim universities where what they're doing is research into the jinn, which are essentially, like demons as well.
Yeah.
And when they look into this, because they're using the Quran as a basis of truth, so they're taking this spiritual but also materialist approach. They don't unlink them. So they use the Quran as a guide to their actual research. And in doing so, they have decided to look under microscopes to try to find the jinn, understanding the jinn as perhaps some sort of physiological thing, something akin to bacteria or a virus or something to that, regard. So there's a lot of different ways you could infer that answer under various worldviews, even those that aren't necessarily Christian, but which I think leads to why it's been so mysterious for so long.
Which leads me to a what if scenario. And of course, neither one of us can answer it, but if he is truly just a physical healer, if he's not, again, I'm not being blasphemous here, so people don't write me emails, but if he's truly just a physical healer and you're dealing with someone with mental illness, how does he physically heal that person at that time with a lack of what we have for pharmaceuticals now today? And even some mental illnesses you can't heal. You can only treat. how in that moment, in just a laying of hands, do you ease someone's symptoms?
That's as you said, that would be virtually impossible to answer under those circumstances, but we could kind of speculate to try to fit an answer in. So if you say something like, well, the guy was schizophrenic and that's not necessarily curable in the ways that, we understand today. Okay, but perhaps he wasn't schizophrenic. Perhaps he was having a panic attack. Maybe it was something so bad, but observably bad. And maybe all it took would be the laying of hands and somebody to make somebody else feel better. And placebo effect is very real. Not to say that Jesus wouldn't have magical powers, but if you were to sort of reframe it this way to understand the physical component to it, just the fact that somebody could touch you and inspire you, and inspire is a very strong word because it comes from the Latin inspirare, which specifically means when a deity would breathe life into you. So breathe and impart an idea into you. And so it's not a small thing to say that perhaps Jesus was so inspirational that the laying of the hands was all it took for him to have a different outlook and feel at ease.
It's interesting indeed to throw out the what ifs and to play skeptic on it. That's for sure. I want to go from a laying of hands and healing to believing whether demons are real or not, and if curses are real or not. As you research demons and demons themselves, there are many psychics that would say, I've never seen a demon. When I look into the psychic realm, I don't see evil, and if evil even exists. So as you research it, Dr. Lynn, what is the origin of a demon? Is a demon even real, or is a demon a figment of an imagination to get us to fall in line?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that's the $1 million question, really. That's something that's fascinated me and has informed my research. In the beginning of that book, Evil Archaeology, I explain a little bit why I started questioning those very things. Like, what is evil exactly? Does it even matter what it is at the end of the day? Maybe results are all that matters. So, for instance, I start off in the book talking a little bit about a true crime incident that happened some years ago with a guy who changed his name legally to Pazuzu. And so on the cover of the book is the Mesopotamian demon Pazuzu. That's also the demon that is depicted in the film The Exorcist. Right in the beginning, as the film opens, and the book as well. But in the film, there is an excavation going on in Iraq, and the priest, who is the exorcist, is also there doing archaeological work. And there's a brief moment where he sees Pazuzu standing as an artifact, as a big statue. And it's not very much explained or whatnot. It just kind of goes into the film. But over time, you do realize that is the demon that's responsible for the possession of the main character. So this is Pazuzu, right? And so later, you have this man in North Carolina who goes and he believes he's worshiping Pazuzu. He starts sacrificing animals and doing all kinds of strange, what he called full moon rituals, which, by the way, were not necessarily known in that way in Mesopotamian religion. This is something that, like the Nazis, he made up in order to fit his own idea of faith. So he's doing these things, and over time that doesn't satisfy him. And so he turns to murdering his neighbors, and he starts eating them, and then he buries their bodies in the yard. And of course, side note, it wasn't even his house. He still lived with mom. Jeez. So in his mother's house, he had bodies from the neighbors buried. Now, at the same time, he feels a little disenfranchised, and he somehow gets a girlfriend and a couple other people to join his team of Pazuzu worshiping murderers and cannibals. And this is what happens. And when you see the accounts of the police, when they took pictures too, when you go in and see the crime scenes, it's frightening, as you could imagine. All through the house where he would have had these victims and butchered them on the kitchen table, there are posters from floor to ceiling of Mesopotamian demons, Pazuzu in particular, but even others. And so it's filled with not only strange occult symbolism, but mostly these Sumerian demons. And so even then, he goes to jail awaiting his trial, and he is having a hard time. And his mother says, please help him. I don't think he's going to survive. he says, I need to still make these sacrifices at the full moon in order to appease Pazuzu, or Pazuzu is going to kill me. Please let me do this. And of course, they're saying, brother, no, go back in your cell. We don't give you squirrels to butcher in jail. Get out. I like, this is absurd, right? And so he goes to a psychiatrist. They give him a court-ordered psychiatrist, and he keeps saying, I need to do these rituals or something bad is going to happen to me. And they're like, yeah, okay, go back. Well, one night, there were noises coming from his cell. And the next day, the guards come in and they see he was dead. And he had died. They weren't sure exactly how. They still don't really know how, but they saw that he had scratches and things all over his body, like he'd been attacked, and he bled out. And so they noticed that he had been cut under the brachial artery, so right around the arm. It looked like he had been in a fight, and he laid there and died. He never made it to trial. So when I heard that, I thought, that's wild. Okay, so you could look at it from a couple different perspectives, right? You could say he was possessed, he was worshiping the demon did it to, you could really play into that.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't need to really go far from that. I mean, because that's exactly what happened in the story. This is very public, available information, all the details. So, you could then make that leap to say, well, it was true. He was worshiping Pazuzu, and Pazuzu, took him out. Or you could say, yeah, no, that's not true. He was just mentally ill, and he was a murderer, and what have you. Fine. Either way, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the explanation is. People are dead. They had been eaten and killed. There are people who are gone. At the end of the day, the evil had still manifested. Mm-hmm. So then I got to thinking, at the end of the day, does it even matter if there are such things as demons? And so I think, as maybe unromantic as that is, that was how I approached the book, was taking a bit of that step back and saying, let's not just assume it's demons as a thing, as an entity, as a discarnate entity. Let's look at evil as a phenomenon. And then if it comes down to, hey, and this phenomenon happens to be explained by entities that have no bodies and, fit this other perspective, then so be it. But let's start under the assumption that it's just something that we have to investigate and that it is very real. Then you have to question, well, what is real anyway? How do we know what's real? If it's real enough that it ends the life of an individual, how much more real do you need?
Yeah.
Do you need to see some little guy dressed up in red with a pitchfork to believe that there's evil? I don't, but maybe some do. So that informed the book. So in terms of whether or not there are demons, I research it from a historical perspective, and then I also had a few friends chime in. Mike Ricksecker, who who searches for ghosts and all of that. I wanted to get a paranormal expert's opinion. I also interview an exorcist who's had firsthand experience in this and wanted to hear the accounts. I personally have witnessed an exorcism, and so I put that in the book as well. And I try to just look at it from all of those different fronts. Also a medical front too, because exorcisms are still going on today. It's believed that many of them are a result of people needing help because of epilepsy. So, so many different perspectives. But when it comes down to whether or not there are individual entities that are responsible, I think that is almost the same question as asking, are aliens real? Because hear me out.
No, I like this. Yeah. I like this. I'm giving you the nod.
I know it's a leap. It's a jump, but you could say, yes, in the vast cosmos, that we are in on just this floating rock, to think that we are completely alone doesn't necessarily add up. I think it is, Fermi paradox or not, it seems like pretty likely that there is other life in the universe. Okay, so you can go from saying, yes, there are aliens somewhere out there. Now, do they visit? Do they visit in metallic spaceships? Do they visit? Then that's a whole other question. Okay, but then there could be an answer there, which is, if they do visit us, and if they don't look like the little green men, instead, are they perhaps interdimensional? Is it this other experience that we're having? So the same question that you could have and the same discussion you could have about aliens would be similar to the demons. So are there demons? And if you say demon, you might think, creepy gargoyle looking creatures that come and like haunt your nightmares. And it's like, well, maybe not. But if you say, well, demon is a word that's been used to describe this phenomenon that people have experienced over millennia, and that experience is pretty consistent. And if you just use the word demon and say, let's just take it out and say X, it's a factor of X. What does that mean? If you take out that cultural baggage of it being some kind of gargoyle or pitchfork wielding creature, then maybe you can have a different perspective on it. You can say, well, could it be a spirit? Well, what is a spirit? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe could it be a force, a disembodied force that we don't understand yet? Could it be interdimensional? So there you're opening up a different question that you could start looking into an interdisciplinary realm to try to answer. So that would be in the realm of, say, psychology, neuroscience, cognitive sciences, and even quantum fields. So, to say, are there demons? I could say, yeah, there's not really demons with pitchforks, but let's take it from a more quantum perspective, like a quantum perspective, so a quantum leap, if you will.
Sure.
Maybe there is the possibility of unseen negative forces that act upon us. And though we, have the free will, maybe it's not so easy. Maybe we are getting tempted and tried all the time. And so, that's the perspective I take. And it seems to be consistent throughout a lot of different faith traditions, a lot of different cultures. And it really, even the name demon, it doesn't mean negative. Mm-hmm. We've made it out to be that, but it's like angel, malach, who was messenger. Now we have this like idea of an angel being this precious moments, big blue-eyed child or something. And really it's not that. It's like something completely different. So,
yep.
I think how we use our words and phrase it can be a little problematic because it brings in these stereotypes and biases already. And so if you try to divorce yourself from those words, as powerful as they are, and try to say, just look at it as like, an interesting phenomenon that you have to explore, you start finding new ways of looking at it. And then in my experience, it seems that even those new ways still point back to some of those old ways.
An optimist would say, I can prove that both aliens and demons are real. Here's how I do it. The story you just told about the Pazuzu, sure, demons are real because you just manifested evil, no matter out of the thin air. There's your proof. And as far as aliens go, the slightest bit of intergalactic bacteria falls through the atmosphere, hits Earth. There's your alien. So,
exactly.
Bingo, you just proved both.
It's all about perspective.
Yeah, that would be the NASA scientist going, we proved it. And then they go on break. That's essentially how they get that there. As we're starting to wind down a little bit here, and we haven't even gotten to the Anunnaki or anything like that, but I think we may have to have you back, Dr. Lynn, if you're okay with that.
I'd love to. I could talk all day.
There you go. So,
or all night.
And then I definitely have to have you back when you have the Baphomet book out, and I'll tell you why. Because I got a little, and most people who listen to the show know this. I have a little ancient tie myself here, a little familial tie here, as my 18th great grandfather was the 4th Grand Master of the Knights Templar. So
wow,
we might have
exciting.
We might have to have a little family discussion here.
Definitely, and then come back and definitely I want to come back and talk about the Baphomet book, because that one I feel I have to really unpack for people, because if you look at the cover, it's a little spooky, and if you just hear, hey, it's about Baphomet, I'm trying to put together a book tour right now for October. In New England, which will be fun, and appropriate for that kind of spooky subject matter. But what I found, difficulty getting booked because people do not like the idea of Baphomet.
Right.
Yes. I'm having trouble. I also had an event scheduled, and the person, once they found out what the book was about, they're like, I don't want my venue associated with Baphomet. And it's like, I understand, but wait, hear me out. Like, it's a book about the history of Baphomet, and it kind of coincides with the ideas that I propose in Evil Archaeology, that, you know, part of the power that you would give to evil is fear.
Yes.
And so you have to not be afraid. And if you know, how you are not afraid is through knowledge.
Right.
So you have to learn, you have to have knowledge, and that will empower you then to not be afraid. And so I'm sitting here in my studio. I have a big portrait of Baphomet that was painted by somebody who does art for album covers. And they sent this to me. It has Pazuzu and Baphomet and all kinds of spooky pals. And somebody came in once and they said, how can you sit there, you know, with that? And I'm like, because I'm not afraid, because I understand it.
Yeah.
I understand what it means, the surprising origin of the illustration itself. I'll just give a spoiler here a little bit. The drawing that we're all familiar with was actually a drawing by a Catholic priest who drew Baphomet as a way to express the ultimate in God's forgiveness and love and what he thought was true Catholicism, which was the bringing together of opposites. Now, I'm not saying that that's how it's looked at today, but what I'm saying is there's a complicated story with Baphomet, and it's why the figure remains so controversial and so powerful. But when you understand that, it has less power over you. Yeah. And so we have to learn about the symbols and the things that surround us so that we can walk in the shadow of death and fear no evil.
Exactly. And the fact that the church looked at the Templar and said, you were worshiping Baphomet, and that's why you burned at the stake. It was like, whoa, hey, wait a minute, time out. You know, it's because they were richer than the church.
It's always about money, isn't it?
That's right. It's always about money.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yes, so we have to have you back to talk about that book, and most definitely. So there's so much more to talk about, but as we wind down, I do want to talk about curses, because it's one of those Templar things. Curses. Now, I find the power in the psychology behind curses very intriguing, especially when we talk about, you know, the South, and we talk about Southern culture, and curses are very prevalent there. But I think in the North, we don't believe in curses so much as they do in the Southern U.S. I don't want to cast aspersions or stereotypes here, but I've talked about it a lot on the show in past years. And I'm curious as to where you fall on curses and what you think of curses.
I think there's a couple things there with a curse. In the here and now, in the moment, if you're being cursed, there's great power to that, because the power that we have is within our words. It's like magic spells, our incantations. They're things you say out loud. And we have to understand how powerful the word is. And even if we don't think that it is, we can hear something and just like, whatever. Our subconscious hears it. Mm-hmm. Our subconscious is like our operating system. So it's kind of back to the things I talked about in the beginning about my personal biography. Mm-hmm. If you are a kid and you are told, say, something fairly benign, that, oh, you're not very good at math, say, you know, a lot of people hear that. Maybe they internalize it and say, I'm not that good at math. And then they disregard it. Doesn't mean that they're good or not good at math at all. There's nothing to that. And as someone who has taught kids, I'll say that is a common phenomenon, that they'll just say, oh, I'm not good at it. Well, who told you that? How did you know that? Well, you know, I had a teacher once. And so those voices, the words that teacher spoke once, so maybe that you're not cut out for this, that programs their operating system so that it's not questioned. It's, of course, I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math. So they don't pursue it. They don't take the time to work to become better at something or hone a skill. So words carry great power. So in a moment, if somebody's cursing you, you may not think anything of it, but your subconscious could be ruminating on that in the background, and it could affect how you operate. It could affect how you behave and think, and it could have that placebo effect. So that's one thing that a curse could do in the moment. In terms of things like intergenerational curses, and I can talk maybe a little disparagingly because I have an Appalachian background, and there's a whole lot there. So, but I won't maybe. But the idea of, say, intergenerational curses, I don't think that is far from true. In fact, I think that it speaks again to this idea of handling illnesses and behavior that is maybe out of the norm as something not necessarily medical, but instead spiritual. Okay. And again, can you even say that there is a distinction? So, the body-mind question there. So for instance, if you have somebody in a dysfunctional home, you could look at that as though, there's demonic entities, there's spirits, the family is possessed, and maybe there's drinking involved, and they call alcohol spirits for these reasons.
Yep.
So maybe this is something that goes on, and you have a person who's brought up in that, right? Well, later, what's going to happen to them? They're carrying those demons with them because they repeat that trauma and abuse. They repeat that behavior. They internalize that both psychologically, and now we know through epigenetics, genetically, physically. So sometimes you can go deep into a generation and you are physically carrying the genetic profile of your grandmother who went through a famine, perhaps. So if she went through a famine, and this is all mainstream science here, it's in the literature. Yep. The research in epigenetics is quite fascinating. And it says that, hey, you know what? People who, were suffering through famines and this sort of thing, they pass these genetic differences down to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and those children who maybe grow up in a place of plenitude and, Western civilization, or all the things we like to call like progress and industrialization, whatever. And they don't have a need for any of these, pastoral ways or canning or, all of that. And so they start gaining weight, or they have a different stocky body size, or maybe they don't have the same fast twitch muscle responses, or all of these things that are very biophysical and that can be traced to like the traumas of grandparents and beyond. And you could call that a curse for sure, because something negative happened to the family. And after it's passed on, even if people are so, quote, over it psychologically, their physical bodies may not be over it. Their genetic code still carries the curse of that family. Mm-hmm. So then that leads to a bunch of questions like, okay, well, go further back in that family. Like, who was the first one to make a decision to say, maybe back in Ireland before you went to Appalachia, who was the first one to pick up the drink and start this, dysfunction?
Right.
Were they inspired somehow through maybe a discarnate entity? I mean, these are not necessarily things that could be answered right now, but these are things to question and consider, that perhaps curses are something to reconsider. Maybe just the mechanisms with which they are understood differ slightly from the way that Hollywood has portrayed it, which is always convenient, of course, because when Hollywood portrays something as a caricature, as we've talked about, you can say, oh, well, that's silly. I would recognize that. That's not true. And then you toss it to the side and you don't look into it further. So if you take that kind of bias out and you look at it differently, you start to understand things maybe for what they are.
Wow. Yeah. See, this is chill bumps right here, Dr. Lynn. You got me today. Man, I love discussions like this. I love learning. I love learning from you. You live up to the hype. I'll tell you that. That's for sure.
I appreciate the kind words.
It's man, I think I only got to about maybe 2 or 3 of what all the things I wanted to get to today, but I definitely want to have you back because there's so much here. You have so much here to there's so much to your makeup and so much to what you have to offer to this world, and I so greatly appreciate you spending even just a little bit of time with me here on this program today.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. If I could just add maybe one final thought.
Please
to pull this together.
Yes.
I want to say for anybody, because I don't generally spend a lot of time talking about my background, my personal background like this.
Sure.
So I do want to kind of put out one piece of advice for anybody who may be listening and they hear a story that might sound, kind of inspirational, like, oh, wow, you started in a bad way, but now you're somewhere else that you're, quite happy with and that sort of thing. Anybody can do that. Everybody has that capability, that power, even if you're in a moment where you're like, no, but not me. Obviously, I'm in different circumstances. No, that's not true. Here's the one piece of advice I have for anybody. It's not what it seems when people say, hey, you should follow your passion, right? Okay, follow your bliss, as Joseph Campbell used to say. No, you follow your passion. Now, before you kind of dismiss that and say, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say, just think of this. The word passion comes from the word to suffer, pasonium. So when we think of Jesus, say the Passion of the Christ, we don't think, oh, well, he was loving that cross, right?
Right.
No, we've conflated this idea of passion with this romantic passion or this like desire to do something fulfilling. Passion means suffering, literally. So then when you think somebody's telling you, follow your passion, they're telling you, follow your suffering. So why in the world would I tell people to follow their suffering? Here's why. Suffering, as the Buddha taught, is real and inescapable. It's the one promise we have is you are going to suffer. It doesn't matter how good your life is or how happy you are. We all suffer. To varying extents, we all suffer. So you've accepted that they're suffering. The key is when you have passion and you follow that passion, you follow the suffering that makes meaning. So you can say, at the end of the day, I'm going to suffer, okay? What is it that I'm willing to suffer for so much that it's worth it? So is it a job? Is it a thing that you do? Because anything that you do, even if it's writing, it can be a slog, right? It's like not all the time where you sit there and I'm going to write my book. And it's no, not at all. Sometimes it's miserable to write. But you suffer and then you think, but is it worth it? Is there something here? And that answer is different for everybody. Everybody has their own passion. But it's foolish to tell like young people, especially, well, just follow your passion, follow the stuff that you love and it's exciting, because eventually it's not exciting, it's work. But is it suffering that's worth doing? Is it worth the suffering? And if so, then you've just found your meaning. And that's all that we can ask for. So push through to your suffering, but identify what it is that's worth suffering for. Follow your passion.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in this world that are suffering because they haven't followed their passion. There's
True.
A lot of people who are listening to this broadcast right now that are sitting and saying, I wish I would have. Yeah.
It's never too late. It really is never too late. I can't say that enough. It is never too late, because the time's going to go by anyway if you're lucky enough. And it's better off to look back and say, I did it. You just regret the shots you didn't take, right?
Right.
You do it and you follow that passion. Follow what it is that you will stay up late for, that you won't give up for, that even though you have to work like a menial job and go the 9 to 5 or more, that you can stay up that little bit and push through. And again, that could be something totally different, of course, for everybody. Yeah. It could be just parenting. It could be having a happy family. It could be doing something big, going back to school, or just, making music or anything. That's what's so cool, is that we get to decide, what is it? You're here to suffer. Make it matter.
Perfect. That's a perfect way to end it. By the way, you want to hear more of this wisdom? It's very simple. Dr. Lynn has a wonderful podcast called the Midnight Academy Podcast. We'll have all the information right here in the description of this show, so you can follow Dr. Lynn away from Darkness Radio here and get more of her wisdom from the podcast and from her books and much, much more. Dr. Heather Lynn, I want to thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Heather Lynn for being on the program today. Again, folks, I encourage you to pick up a couple different books here. Women on the Fringe is the first one, to check out exactly what she said in that book that is so intriguing. The other one is Evil Archaeology, Demons, Possessions, and Sinister Relics, which is her book that she has out there. For all of Dr. Lynn's different books, drheatherlynn.com. We've got the links in the description of this program. And also check out her podcast, which is called the Midnight Academy Podcast. Dr. Heather Lynn, just so incredibly intelligent, compelling, and has such incredible information. And I encourage you to check her out. She's definitely going to be on the program again soon, because we've got so much more information to glean from her. And I can't wait to have her back here on this program. So if you were watching my social media yesterday, I told you that I was going to check out Back to Black, which is the new Amy Winehouse biopic. Now, keep in mind, this is not a documentary. I'm going to give you a quick 2-minute review on this. I was a huge Amy Winehouse fan in life and after she had passed away. Unfortunately, this is not a documentary. They did a documentary on Amy called Amy back in, I believe it was 2016. Keep in mind, Amy, one of the 27 Club. Unfortunately, that's a tragic club that includes Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and many more. We don't have time to go into everyone who's in that 27 club. And some people say, well, maybe Amy had it coming, which to the people who say that, shame on you. Amy was not one of those who, even though she seemed like she might have been one of the more willing ones, she definitely was a tragic figure at that. When you look at some of the things that she went through in her life, it was a tragic story. She was one that led with her heart, not necessarily with her head. And she really was a more simple person. All she really wanted was a simpler life. She realized she had a talent, but she was one that was okay with wanting to be loved, wanting to have a family, and not necessarily wanting the fame and the attention, although she realized that she had a gift and had to share it with the world. But boy, was she a tough one, that's for sure. And she did get swelled up into the throes of addiction and consumed by it. And there's a sad line in the movie where she's standing there with her father and she says, "Dad, I'm an addict." And her dad is an enabler. Let's face it. He was an enabler her entire life. And, at one point they're standing in the club that her grandmother, who she idolizes so much, they're standing there and she's absorbing the vibration and the feel of her grandmother, who's passed away at this point. And, her father says, "Well, Nan would have been proud of you." And she says, "No, Nan would have been one of the first ones to want to knock me out because she abhorred addicts." And her Nan was famous and hung among famous people, including Tony Bennett, who the one thing I guess lets me down about the movie, and there's a few things that do let you down. If you're looking for a biography, this isn't it. This is an interpretation from maybe Amy and Amy's family's point of view. It does play fair, don't get me wrong. It plays fair with the story. It does show her abuses. It does show the fact that she was an abuser, both of drugs and of people, including her husband. It does show that she had a wilder side, but it also shows she had a tragic side too. And for that, I think it's a fair interpretation, and I enjoyed it. By the way, the actress that plays Amy Winehouse, she learned how to sing like Amy, talk like Amy. She is Amy Winehouse. When you get lost for the runtime of the movie in her character, you believe she is Amy. Her name is Marissa Abella, or Abella, I believe is what her last name is. You truly believe she's Amy because her mannerisms, everything about her is Amy Winehouse, including the voice and her singing voice, which is phenomenal. I almost wish she'd record an album as Amy. It's a tragic story, and one that when you come out of it, if you're a true Amy Winehouse fan, you may feel a little cheated. I'm not gonna lie. You're gonna say, well, they forgot this, they forgot that, they forget this, and you may want to pick it apart. But you have to remember, this is being told from her perspective. It's not a biography. For that, with artistic license, I thought it was good. And I'd give it a 4 out of 5. Now, it's not getting that kind of rating online. It's getting more of a 6.5 out of 10 online. And I had talked honestly with the marketing company after the movie, and they're saying it's getting mixed reviews. With that, I would tell you this. If you're an Amy Winehouse fan, go see it and remember that this is not a biography, that this is an interpretation of her life as probably being played out by her family. So it's her family's interpretation of her life, and enjoy it for what it is. But go to see Marissa Abella's role in it and how she plays Amy Winehouse, and prepare to be stunned by her performance. That's what makes it worth the cost of the admission. It's good in that respect. I think you'll like her interpretation. So there you go. That's my review of Back to Black. Speaking of music, speaking of artists and spirit, Boy, have I got a week for you next week. As you heard me announce on Supernatural News, Steve Vai is with us next week. And we're going to be talking about channeling spirit through music, or using spirit to channel music. Same thing, or different. And channeling that music using spirit. And the fact that I've always believed that the better musicians out there are truly getting their talent from spirit. I wanted to go to the best of the best. I wanted to go to someone who in their field is a virtuoso, someone who is beyond talented, someone who sure has the sheer talent. And Steve Vai is the best of the best when it comes to rock guitarists. Find me one better, I'll give you $100. And don't give me Nuno Bettencourt. He's not better. He's a shredder, but he's not a composer. And don't give me Yngwie Malmsteen either. He's not that. But I was incredibly blessed to get Steve Vai on the show. The interview will knock your socks off. I'll tell you that much. It's one that you're not going to want to miss. And if I've ever connected with someone, I think I connected with Steve. I think you're going to be impressed with the interview. Yes, it's already done. It's already in the can. It was, for me, a life-changing experience. Being able to see how an artist operates, and especially an artist that connects to spirit. I can't tell you anything other than that because I don't want to spoil the interview. I think will change your outlook, especially if you're a Steve Vai fan, in a good way as to how Steve operates. And you get a little behind the scenes look at his creative process. It's kind of cool. Big week next week, folks. That's all I can tell you. In the meantime, we're coming up on the weekend. If you're coming up to the Palmer this weekend, I can't wait to meet you. If you don't have your tickets yet, I think there's still a couple tickets left. Grab them. Go to darknessradioshow.com. Go to the events page. Click on that link for potographsforpooches.com. If you can't make it, still go to potographsforpooches.com. Click on the link. Donate. Help out the animals this weekend. Do it for your buddies here at Darkness Radio. Donate in our name if you want to, or donate in your own name and let them know that you listen to Darkness Radio and that you are a listener and you're one of our family and you want to donate to theirs. We're donating to Eagle's Nest Animal Shelter this weekend, and we're looking forward to it. I get to take a little tour before the event, so I'm looking forward to seeing all the animals up there, giving some love to the animals up there this weekend. That's going to be the highlight of my weekend. I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to seeing Richard Estep again this weekend. I love Richard. It's going to be good to see him this weekend. Looking forward to seeing Tim in person this weekend, Tim and Lauren this weekend. I'm looking forward to the weekend. It's going to be a good weekend. I continue to be blessed in every single way, and I have to thank you guys for it. I am truly grateful for you guys, so thank you so much. Been getting a lot of nice emails from you guys, too, about what you've been hearing on the show, so thank you for that. Go be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. Go out and just pop in on somebody, say hi, do something nice for them. Get outside and enjoy the weekend. Go out and have some fun this weekend. But go out and make somebody's day while you do it. That's all I ask. We'll see you on Tuesday, True Crime Tuesday. We've got Supernatural News on Wednesday and Steve freaking Vai on Thursday. Man, can you stand it? I almost can't wait for next week to get here. And we'll update you a little bit on what goes on. You know what? I may even see if I can sneak in a Supernatural News segment from the Palmer. We'll see. I'm going to see how many treats I can sneak in next week for you guys. How do you like that? It's all coming up next week on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.